Hello, my name is Lee Taylor, and I really like to knit, so much so that some of my friends call me the Knitwit. I hope you enjoyed today's video and possibly even learned something. So let's get started. This week's video, we are going to shake things up a little bit. We're going to do a stash dive. We are going to talk about yarn weights and what that actually means and how that is used in knitting. We are going to look at updates, and then we have the bonus clip. So we're shaking things up because we do not have a swatching video this week. Those will probably resume starting next week. So let's jump straight into it. Let's look at our stash dive for this week. It's a mysterious area between the green and the blue that I'm calling the teal section. It's not quite teal because I think of teal as a darker color, but it's, like I said, it's somewhere between a green and somewhere between a blue. It's somewhere right in the middle, and it actually sits right here. So let's jump to the overhead and see what those yarns are that I have in my stash. We're going to jump straight in with this yarn here. This is Lotus Yarn Mimi Plus. It is a lace weight yarn, and 50 grams of this gives you 328 yards, and that is this entire cake. I have 5 cakes in total. This one is an interesting blend. It is 37% mink, 33% rayon, 18% cashmere, 12% wool. The color name is light blue. And it is definitely, it's showing up pretty accurate on camera actually. Our next yarn is Universal Yarns Bamboo Pop. You've seen this one many times, but now we're actually talking about it. It is a DK weight yarn. 100 grams gives you 292 yards, and this is the entire cake. I have 2. It is a 50-50 blend of cotton and bamboo, and the colorway is Earth Science. Next we have Lily Sugar and Cream Solids and Denim, and it is a worsted weight. It is all cotton. 71 grams gives you 120 yards. It's a little brighter in person than it's showing up here. And the color is Beach Glass. Last we have Cascade 220 Superwash Wave. This is a worsted weight. This cake is 100 grams and gives you 220 yards, thus Cascade 220. It is 100% superwash wool, and the color name is blue green. And there are multiple different colors in this, and I'm going to talk more about this yarn at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. So altogether here, there wasn't much in this set this week. We have the lace weight Lotus with the crazy mixture. We have the Universal Yarn Bamboo Pop, the Sugar and Cream Solid Cotton, and the Superwash Cascade 220. That is all of the yarns on my blue-green/teal shelf. This week, instead of a Swatch Lab, we're going to take a look at yarn weights and what that means. It does not refer to the actual weight that a ball of yarn is. It refers to the thickness of the yarn itself. There are a couple of different ways of measuring this. Most common here in America is to use the Craft Yarn Council system of measurements, which I will discuss in depth in the overhead. However, another one is to look at wraps per inch. and that gives you a more consistent look, which I will pop up a picture of a tool to do that right here. And it's just a simple way of seeing what a yarn weighs, so you know what gauge you need to knit it to, what needles to grab, how the fabric's going to turn out. It's some very important information, although you can use any size thread yarn to knit any project. The bigger the yarn, the faster the project will go. But the more dense it has a greater chance of being dense at a thicker yarn weight versus a very fine yarn weight. So that is going to take the place of our Swatch Lab this week. The Swatch Lab should be returning next week unless something else comes along first. So let's switch over to the overhead and take a look at what the Craft Yarn Council shows for the different yarn weights. As I mentioned in the overview, the Craft Yarn Council is trying to standardize yarn weights, and I actually have a printout of what they're trying to do here. Let me grab my handy little knitting wand here. You know what? Let's take a moment and talk about this knitting wand. I haven't really discussed this. This is one of 4 things that my grandfather got when he was overseas in the war, and brought these back. There were 2 long ones and then 2 that were about this long here from, this here. It's been said that they are chopsticks, and it's been said that they are actually just hairpins. I am more prone to believe the chopsticks because they come in pairs, and unfortunately the other 3 have been lost. This is the only one that I have left, and I guard this like a mother bear guards her cubs, and so it has become my yarn wand. As you can see, it's got beautiful inlays, and it looks like mother of pearl in there, and it's just absolutely gorgeous, and I love it. Another reason why I think it's chopsticks is it's kind of hard to see here on camera, but there's actually little indentations like someone has used them to eat with. But it is rounded rather than squared off, so some said, well, that's because it's for hair. But either way, that's my yarn wand. So let's get back to this yarn weights. Excuse that little tangent here. So this is how the Craft Yarn Council organizes the weights of yarn. And what the Craft Yarn Council is the manufacturers of yarn, knitting needles, notions, patterns, anything to do with knitting or yarn or crochet, anything that has to do with yarn is overseen by the Craft Yarn Council here in America. That does not apply to everywhere in the world, but here in America, this is what they use. And they have them grouped down with 0 being lace weight, 1 is superfine, also called sock or fingering weight, 2 is fine and considered sport or baby weight, light, a 3, is a DK or a light worsted, 4, we have a medium, which is a worsted or Aran, 5, we have a bulky, which is a chunky, craft or rug. I have only ever seen it called chunky. I've never seen these other 2. I'm not saying they don't exist, I just haven't seen them in the wild, so to speak. 6, we have super bulky or roving. And 7 is jumbo and called jumbo or roving. Roving is unspun yarn 90% of the time. Sometimes other things are called roving even though they're not. So something can be called a sock yarn or a fingering yarn interchangeably, but that does not mean that they're good for knitting socks. To knit socks, it really helps to have a strong fiber in it, like say nylon is used a lot. You could use silk, but generally it's nylon, and that just adds more structure and support and something to help it just kind of last a little bit longer. You can knit socks with just fingering weight, but you run the risk of them not lasting near as long. And also socks in general, I mean, you can knit socks out of any of these sizes that you want to, but you knit socks at a more dense gauge, and we'll talk about gauge in a future video more in depth, but you knit it at a firmer gauge, and that helps it to hold up more as well. So they recommend these. I'll post a picture here of this so you can pause it and take a little bit better look at it, and kind of, you may be able to even zoom in. But this just gives you the general knitting gauge and recommended needle size. The recommended needle size is to knit a stockinette sweater, not to knit socks. You want socks to knit more dense, so you would not necessarily use this gauge and these needles to knit socks, even if you're knitting it, say, in this jumbo down here. And then they also give the crochet gauge and hook size for those as well. I will also upload a picture here of another set of yarn sizes and the chart. So that is a little bit more in-depth on yarn sizes. And for an example, we will use the yarn from this week's Stash Dive. So this is a lace weight, which is a very fine yarn. This is a DK, which is a number 3. So lace is 0, DK is 3. And then here we have worsted, which is a number 4. And then there's this worsted, which is also a number 4. So let me put this piece of paper under here so we can get a glimpse at all these yarn strands side by side. So we'll start off here with the lace weight. Then we have the DK weight. We have this worsted weight. And this worsted weight. So you can definitely see that there are different sizes, but all in all, there's really not that much different in size. I mean, obviously this is going to knit up faster than this lace weight is because the yarn is larger and you use larger needles, and so the stitches are larger and it just naturally knits up bigger. That's just the way that physics works. A bigger material makes a bigger end product. Usually, it at least works up faster to get the same distance. And then of course, you've got a 1 and 2 in between here, and then, 5 through 7 on past here. But that gives you a general look at the sizes, the yarn weights. It's called weight, not as in how much the ball of yarn weighs. It's called weight as in its, for lack of a better word, its girth, its circumference, the thickness of the yarn. And as you've seen this right here, when you take and pull it, it thins out and then it bounces back, which can affect its gauge. Again, gauge will be discussed more in depth in a future video. But here is a side-by-side view of a 1, 3, and then 2 different 4s. So hopefully that clears up a little bit about yarn weights. There's a lot more to it than that. But honestly, unless you're actively trying to knit, it's more complicated than it's worth to explain. So we'll just leave it at this here. Let's take a look in the overhead at this week's project updates. We have many. We have the 46 limit cardigan, the blueberry socks, Yerba, Lee Yerba, and the gnome. So let's switch over to overhead and take a closer look at what I accomplished this week. So last week I showed, or I think I showed, it may have been the week before, progress on my socks, my blueberry socks. But I want to talk a little bit more about it this week Ignore this yarn tail here. Crazy stitch markers all over the place. I know I discussed these and what all these mean. The brass, just to touch over again, brass means that the pattern section changed. That's the sub-projects. The silver is the day's knitting worth. So from here to here is 1 day. From here to here is 1 day, here to here, and then here to here. And then the yellow marks every 20 rows. So I got the foot done last week. And then this week I did the heel. So the heel is completely done. And I've joined back in the round to knit for the leg, because when you do the heel, you're just working back and forth. So you're actually knitting and purling when you're working the heel. So now I just knit the leg with 2x2 ribbing for 60 rows. And then I will switch to the twisted cable stitch, also known as a right twist, which is a mock cable, to do the cuff and then bind off, and this sock will be done. We are going on a semi-family vacation this month, and I'm thinking I may take this with me to knit. I would normally take this with me when I go to doctor's offices, but I did not take this with me this week to do that. So I may take this to the cabin and see how much of this I can finish. Hopefully I may even be able to finish the leg and then can start the cuff. So this may be done this month if all goes according to plan. So I'm super excited to have this pair of socks finished. And when I tried on the first sock that I knit of this pair, it was the first sock that I've knit that actually fit my foot like a sock should. A lot of people say things like fits like a glove. Well, men's gloves tend not to fit very tight unless it's like a latex surgical glove. I want stuff to fit like a sock. I want it to hold snug and not slip and slide around, because the slipping and sliding around can cause irritation and can cause the wool to felt, which means instead of it being all elastic and individual stitches, it becomes one solid piece of fabric, just like you would go to the store and buy felt. That's what that is. They just took wool fibers and basically it mats together, and you cannot undo that, and it will shrink in size when it does that because it loses all of the airspace between the stitches. So there's a little bit more in-depth look at the blueberry socks than what I normally do. So hopefully this will be done very soon and I can show you the next sub-project completed on it. First off, I want to say please excuse this bulge. This is hiding the clamp for my overhead camera setup. So I apologize for that in advance. So let's take a look at the Limit cardigan. I finished the back panel and I'm so excited. Let me see if I can zoom out. Here we go. And this is my notebook that holds my notes about the projects. So let's pop this open and take a look and see what we've got here. So first off, you can see the tops are on these stitch holders because you do not bind off on this. You leave it exposed and you'll join the front panels here, and then you'll come in and join for the neck and shawl stitches, or not shawl, the neck and collar stitches, excuse me. So here we have red markers marking 20 ridges, which would be 40 rows. This dark gray stitch here, there we go, marks where the sub-project ended. That's where I bound off for the underarm. This purple shows where I finished the bind off, because this row count, this single row count, and all of these row counts are all different ones. So I marked that so that way I can keep an accurate count of my stitches. Then up here, you can see these here. This is where the neck will be. So the collar will be attached there. So that is the Limit cardigan. and I will post attach a picture to it as an overhead in one single shot. And there's really not a whole lot more to say on this. I was so pleased to get this finished, and I'm ready to start the next one, but I will not start this one until I finish the front panel on the Yerba that I have going. So these are going to kind of take back and forth, one sub project and then the other one. So that way they both progress relatively steady. Okay, here we're going to look at the Yerba. Stitch markers everywhere on this. And I actually picked this up this week and knit some more on there. And as you can, like I said, as you can see, there are stitch markers absolutely everywhere on it. So all of the white markers are what I've done for that day's knitting. Zoom back in here. Blue markers mark every 20 rows. Red marker marks the sub projects. So this looks like this is way up here, but this pocket is not been attached yet, and so it wants to pull down, but it will actually set up like that. This yellow marker simply shows me that row right down the side where I need to attach the pocket, and I've actually got these black stitch markers that are kind of tucked under, but it's holding the corners and the middle of that pocket on the row of stitches where I need, so I know where to seam that in. So I'm getting very close to being done with this sub project of it. So this part of the sub project goes up to the underarm bind off. So this one's moving along very quickly, and I'm hoping to have this piece done by July. Hopefully, we'll see, but that's my plan, is to have this panel done by July. Okay, here's what I have done of Navy National Guard. National Guard being all one word. I knit the hat and most of the butt yesterday. I still have the rest of the butt, the nose, and the beard, as well as stuffing it and putting in the marbles. But this is a Father's Day gift for Mom's dad. And he was in the National Guard in Desert Storm and was in the Navy. So I figured this would be National Guard colors and this would be for the Navy. So hopefully he will enjoy his Father's Day gift of Navy National Guard. A cousin, but not direct line in the Newman clan. For our bonus video this week, I decided that it might be time to talk about stitch markers. And there are multiple different types. Let me zoom in really close here. And I'm going to lay these out and then discuss about them and what they're used for and what they work best at. But let's get an overhead view of them all together first. Sorry, that one's not showing up. Well, you can see it. Okay, so these are stitch markers. Move these up, and I'll explain why here in a second. Okay, so these are all stitch markers. As you can see, each one is very different from the other, and yet you can see some similarities. For example, these three up here do not open. They are a single circle, and therefore you can't add them after the fact. They have to slide on the needle, and they just work back and forth across the needle, and you knit till you get to it, and then you slip it, and then you keep working. It can only come off of there when you get to that point, unless you want to cut it off. You cannot take it off until you actually get to it. Excuse me. These 4 down here, however, are all locking stitch markers, which means you can open them and place them somewhere and close them up, and they will then lock in place. However, you can take them off after the fact and you can move them. This one is like a safety pin style. Would be called, if this was metal, this would be called a coilless safety pin, because it does not have the round coil at this end that the yarn can get hung on. Here is another form of a coilless safety pin, often called a light bulb pin for obvious reasons. This is just a simple locking stitch marker. And this one is called a lobster claw stitch marker because when you open it, sorry, these are fiddly. When you open it, it kind of acts like a lobster claw. So these can be added after the fact, and you can detach it, and as you work up, you can just move it up the garment or whatever it is you happen to be knitting. These stay on the needles until you get to them, and then you can take them off. You cannot add them after the fact until you get to where you want to put them. So these are obviously much more flexible, and more people prefer these because they can take it off and move it whenever they want to. So different uses for these, for example, is if you're doing a pattern repeat, so like you're knitting 5, purling 2, knitting 6, purling 8, you can put one of these markers each time you change your stitch. So you would knit, marker, purl, marker, knit, marker, purl, marker to keep up with your pattern. Or you can do knit, purl, marker, knit, purl, marker. Either way, that's where these are generally used. These are generally used to keep track of rows because they can be added afterwards, and also are used sometimes to designate the right side or public side versus the wrong side. So those are the different types that I have. These 2 up here I made myself. This one, of course, come with a skein of yarn. These 2 are very common ones in just little kits. These are very easy to obtain. These actually are not designed as stitch markers. They are just general plastic loops for other various crafts, and it just bounced away. Sorry about that. But can definitely be used as stitch markers. You can also use things like bobby pins or regular safety pins or little bits of string. Anything can be used as a stitch marker if you are if you want to be adventurous and try it, it potentially can become a stitch marker. So now let's take a look at these stitch markers here. These are the ones I bought in a kit, and we have the regular, just silver color. This, what I'm calling bronze, is just a dark silver, purple, blue, yellow, brass, white, red, sky blue, and black. So those are my different colors of stitch markers. To end this week's video, we're going to take a look at future videos. I mentioned in the stash dive that I would talk more about the Cascade 220 yarn. The next project that I cast on will be a cowl, which is basically a tube that, you know, just goes around the neck. It acts like a scarf without having ends. It's all contained in one piece. And I will be using the Cascade 220 for that. I will put the name of it down here at the bottom because I will not be able to pronounce it correctly. And so that's what I have going with that. I also have 2 scarves that I've been designing, a hat that I've been designing, and a shawl that I've been designing. So 4 designs that I'm hoping to work on this year. The first of those will probably be the shawl. More on the names of those in next week's video. I just kind of wanted to touch base on what I have planned for the future. I'm very excited for those. I will also be doing videos on how to knit a hat from the cast on through the bind off and blocking. Probably will not be on these videos. I'll probably set up a separate series of videos for those that do not want to learn how to knit a hat. But that's what I have planned for the future, is 5 projects and a new set of videos on how to knit a hat. So I completed 3 of my sub projects. I completed the foot of the sock, I completed the heel of the sock, and I completed the back of the Yerba 46 limit cardigan. So that gives me leeway, pun intended, to start 3 new projects. Now, one of the projects was swatching, and that was for the shawl. So that one I've done. So now I can get started actually knitting on that. I still have to buy the yarn for that, but that has been picked out and will be coming to me shortly. So that leaves me 2 projects that I can start, and one of them, of course, being the cowl with this. This yarn is used a lot of times by people who knit sweaters. It's superwash, which makes it less scratchy, even though it's wool. So I'm knitting it as a cowl so it can go around my neck and on my chest, so I can see how that actually will feel before I buy a sweater's worth of this yarn, and then I can't wear it as a sweater, and then I have to come up with something to do with it. So this is a wearable swatch in a form, because yes, it will be its own project, but it is a project to see if I can wear it as another project. And then I can cast on for something new, which I have an idea of what I want to do for that. Probably one of the 4 things that I'm designing other than the shawl, so one of 3 options. And we will see. I haven't decided if I will show those projects on the video as I'm working on them, or when it's finished, or when the recipient receives them, because at least 3 of them will be a gift. So that is what's in store for the future, and hope you enjoy, and I will see you next week.